So this idea of this pulse, this radiant, vibratory pulse of fundamental aliveness of life itself, and that pulse is always throbbing at that deepest space, deep inside you. It's always moving. And then in this incredible text of the Tantrāloka that is so fascinating, it's a book of wisdom. It's a book of highest teachings. And in this book, then, Abhinavagupta also tells us, he says, it isn't just life in the manifest form that is vitalized, animated, and suffused with its aliveness in that way. We see when we look at everything, even things that we think are inert or so-called lifeless are filled with a certain kind of energy. We know the energy even of the atoms that compose the rock in that way, but the vitality of the sky, of the sun, of the breeze, of the air, of nature itself, and of course of all living beings supported by this life breath. But it is that prana from which the experience of time also arises. These sages said, look, there's no such thing as absolute time. In the absoluteness, there is no time. It is eternal. It is timeless. It has no sequentiality. It is actually beyond sequence and non-sequentiality. That dyad of sequentiality and non-sequentiality itself emerges in the manifestation of this indescribable unboundedness of the absolute. And one of the emergences is then this idea that things emerge into sequence, and that then we have this mysteriousness of time. So many different philosophers have tried to write about time in every tradition. Human beings have pondered time. And then, Abhinavagupta says, look, time is itself an expression of the pulse of this life force of prana itself. Time is born of prana. And that prana, then, that vitality of life, creates the experience, the subjective experience of sequence, of moments in that way. And there's an intrinsic variability. I'm always saying when we think about our meditation, one of the things that happens in our meditation, and people will often report, the time went by really fast. Doesn't always happen in every meditation, but many times say, meditate for 25 minutes. And, so many times in teaching meditation over so many decades, and the person will say, well, I can't sit still for 20 minutes. I can't sit still for 5 minutes. What are you talking about? I'll go crazy trying to sit still. So you're not just going to be sitting still. Your inner attention opened into the subtle by the exquisite pulse of your heart seed mantra is going to allow you to register just the first band of the subtle within yourself. And it will have just a minute degree of increase. And that increase will be intriguing to your mind. Your mind will want to explore or enter into or merge with that slight value of more. That slight value of more will then modulate into yet more, into yet more of more, into more and more in that way. And in that way, you're moving deep into the depth, even as you're moving away from the surface where there's a lot of activity, and you experience, it's quieter in here. And yet somehow I'm intrigued. It's like I'm following the trail of something sweet inside. I can't really put it into words, but I like it. I want to experience more of it. I want more in that way. But it's that intriguing, increased value of inner fulfillment, of inner Shakti, of inner this vitality and throb, which begins to reveal itself as we settle in our meditation. There's an increase of this registering of that value of fullness. It's like it is that emanating force of the Shakti, of the Amrita nectar, of the cascade of the light of consciousness and bliss, but we're registering it, as if we're really far away from it. So we're just catching the distant breeze of it at first. And then that distant breeze gets a little closer, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And in following that little bit more inside, the 20 minutes, the 25 minutes, or sometimes we meditate a lot more than that, have gone by so rapidly because our subjective registering of time is relative to the degree of proximity or distance from the value of eternality that is the absolute consciousness itself. And so absorbed in something that draws us closer and closer to that luminosity and eternality of the absolute, our subjective registering of time itself changes and it varies. And we feel like time went by more quickly. So this mutability or this kind of plasticity of time, it can differ in its value. We say, yes, there is such a thing as external time. And this Abhinavagupta acknowledges in his text. He says, there is such a thing as external time. And, we mark that pulse of time externally in a variety of different ways. What we're talking about is to say, when you sit for your meditation, you are getting absorbed gradually closer to a domain in which the subjective registering of time differs, it modulates. And subjectively, it's as if time, you could either say it either way. It's as if time speeds up or time slows down. It changes in character. It changes in its character because of the fact that your attention is registering a deeper pulse of that prana of consciousness, of that life force. And there's another thing that happens. So time varies in that way, but also your breath. It's really, really interesting that, when you learn this practice of Neelakantha meditation, and then, a lot of people have learned many different practices in different places. And I've gotten this question so many hundreds of times, and I'm sure the acharyas get it also, where a person says, well, you taught me this practice of meditation, but what am I supposed to do with my breath? Aren't I supposed to do something with my breath? And the answer is no, there's no component of attempting to do something, so to speak, with the breath during your practice of Neelakantha meditation. However, naturally, spontaneously, and effortlessly, your breath is going to refine. You say the breath, the physical breath begins to refine. So, the tradition then separates out. It says, well, there's a surface or stula breath, then there's a subtle breath, and then there's an ultra subtle breath. So right now we're just talking about the external breath of inhalation and exhalation. And what happens is as your attention, your mind, as it were, is getting absorbed deeper and deeper inside, moving across the vibratory spectrum to register these deeper values of fulfillment inside yourself that are catching you in. And yes, there are other thoughts in your awareness, and at times you come back up to the surface in a big burst of thoughts or memories or emotions. At times the whole inner sphere gets suffused. It's like the octopus that puts the ink into the ocean in that way. All of a sudden some memory, some emotion from the past will burst, and it will create this entire feeling tonality that will take over for a moment, et cetera, and so on. All kinds of stuff will happen. But typically, many times, as you're sitting for your meditation, as the inner attention is refined by settling into subtler places within automatically, as you follow this pulse of the mantra in that way, the mantra itself is being refined, your attention is being refined, your awareness is being refined. It's as if it drags the body along. We say there is a mirrored symmetry between the body and the mind, between the mind and the body. Anything that's happening in the mind has to be reflected in some way in the body. What's happening in the mind? Well, there's less and less activity. How does that register in terms of the body? There's less and less activity. And one of the fundamental markers of activity is the breath. And so you experience that your breath is getting refined, and there will come times, and many of you have had this experience, where it's as if your breath is modulating so softly. And then sometimes you can even ask, am I even breathing? Am I even breathing? It's as if the breath has gotten compressed into itself in a certain kind of way. It's as if the in-breath and the out-breath are kind of joining together. And then it's as if they're pivoting on a kind of knife edge, or the famous razor's edge of the Upanishad, the breath is so refined that your whole body has automatically gone into a state of incredible subtlety of inner functionality. This is super important in so many different ways that this happens automatically. But the reason I'm talking about all this, and we talk about this from the very beginning, practically from the person learning Neelakantha meditation, we talk about these things, but then we say, well, where is this in the tradition? And we realize this is incredibly important and significant. Abhinavagupta in his teachings offers us two phrases. He says, the deep practice of deep meditation, there is this process, he calls it prana grasa. Grasa, G-R-A with a long mark over it, S-A. Grasa means swallowing or digesting. It doesn't literally mean swallowing, but it means that your breath is being refined in such a way. And then during meditation, all of that is slowing down. It's as if this slowing down is dissolving your surface breath. And in that way, now your attention inside of yourself, in that very ultra refined breathing, this is the state of samadhi in that way, where you're going in the direction. Eventually, sometimes it's called the breathless samadhi. It doesn't mean breathless like when you run really fast and then you can't catch your breath. It's breathless in the sense that your inner respiration, the whole system of your individuality, all of the organic functionality of your entire being is being drawn and pulled into a state of extraordinary inner restfulness, inner settledness, inner silence, inner absorption in that way. And it happens completely automatically. We talk about it, but there's nothing that you have to do. It just is going to happen. And many times, right from the beginning, the person sits for meditation. It's like, whoa, my breath started to just get so soft, and it was very pleasing. It was very positive. This is not a scary experience. We experience it in meditation in the sense that when the breath gets ultra refined in this way, then there is this incredible sweetness and this inner silence that allows us to register yet more and discern yet more of that value of wholeness inside us. And Abhinavagupta pairs that up. He talks about prana grasa as intrinsic to the fundamental process of natural deep meditation. And he has another phrase that he talks about. He says, kala grasa, swallowing of time. He says, when you're going into that inner silence, you're moving from external time across the spectrum of this relativity of time as you approach closer and closer to the value of timelessness. And so the swallowing of time, the digesting of time, or the dissolving of time in that way, such that you are registering at the surface of your life the movement of time, and deep inside yourself as the modulation of prana. Remember I said time is the expression of the pulse of prana, the life force. When there's less and less activity, there's less and less of this surface modulation of the breath, and there's less and less of the registering of time, such that you begin to experience that you're closer and closer to the eternal inside yourself. And you're registering, it's a perplexing value of something that stands beyond time. And you realize, yes, that is my very own self. And I am gaining access to that part of me that is actually has always been and will always be outside of time, gazing as the witnessing consciousness on the drama of time and space, of individuality, of individuation, of birth, life, and everything else that happens, et cetera, and so on. But I'm now gaining access to standing in my deepest self, in a place in which I register that time is relative and time, in some ultimate degree, is simultaneously real and unreal. It has a reality to it within a particular range of life, and then it has an unreality to it because you're watching everything from a place of timelessness, of eternality, and also of wholeness and fulfillment. And these are all different aspects and dimensions of the value of rising to higher states of consciousness so that we live our life simultaneously with one piece of us fully embedded in our humanity and our embodied life and all of its exquisite and also not so exquisite concerns and obligations and experiences, et cetera, and so on. But there's another part of us that is waking up, that is the place of the eternality value that stands utterly beyond all of that. So this idea of kala grasa, of swallowing time, which we find in these texts from 1,000 years ago and more, and realize we're experiencing that. This is what's happening to us automatically, that increased access to the timeless dimension of the transcendental unbounded within you gives you increasing and increasing access to this emanating source, because the other thing that pulsates and irradiates out from that absolute consciousness is knowledge. It is the domain of infinite knowledge, of total knowledge, of complete knowledge. And so we live our individual life with increasing degrees of access to the spontaneous upsurge of knowledge from inside us. And that knowledge is natural. It is adapted to the specificity and nuances and precisions of our individual life. It guides us from within.